I'd like to present to you a short homily on the state of America. In this week's Parsha, Vayeshev, Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, eventually ends up in an Egyptian prison, having been falsely accused by his master's wife of sexual advances. In fact, it was she, Potiphar's wife, who tried to seduce Joseph. The difficulty of discerning the truth of sexual assaults that is so in the news nowadays is not only a contemporary problem. We're first introduced to it in this week's Torah portion. In prison, Joseph interprets the dreams of two of Pharaoh's servants, the baker and the cupbearer. The baker will be executed, but the cupbearer will soon be restored to Pharaoh's side. Joseph asks the cupbearer to remember him when he is freed and to mention him to Pharaoh, and thus, Hotzeitani min habayit hazeh, and thus you would free me from this dungeon. The term cupbearer is a bit of a misnomer. He's really more like the sommelier, sar hamashkim, literally the minister of libation. He is a high-ranking member of Pharaoh's staff who is in constant contact with the king. And Joseph knows this, and thus emphasized to him that he, the cupbearer, he himself, he personally has the power to liberate Joseph. Sure enough, the cupbearer was freed in 3 days, as Joseph predicted. But the former prisoner completely forgot about Joseph, who ended up spending another 2 years in jail. Here's the relevant verse. Velo zachar sar hamashkim et Yosef vayishkachehu. And the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, and he forgot him. And this is how the Parsha ends. Joseph is forgotten in prison, out of sight and out of mind, left alone to stew in his own misery. The sages were curious about the wording of this verse. Velo zachar sar hamashkim et Yosef, and the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, vayishkachehu, and he forgot him. Why did the verse say the same thing twice? Why say that the cupbearer didn't remember Joseph and then add, and he forgot him? Doesn't that mean the same thing? It would have been enough simply to say that the cupbearer didn't remember Joseph, or that the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. Why say it twice? Why say vayishkachehu? He forgot him. What does that add? We already know that the cupbearer didn't remember him. One response is that this curious phrasing, he didn't remember and he forgot, indicates a deliberate action on the part of the cupbearer. It wasn't normal forgetfulness. He deliberately put Joseph out of his mind. That's why the verse emphasizes both lack of remembering and forgetting. How could it have been normal forgetfulness? It would have been impossible to forget that this fellow prisoner predicted that he would have been spared execution and restored to Pharaoh in 3 days. We don't forget such things. The cupbearer knew that Joseph was suffering, but he deliberately suppressed this awareness. He was concerned only about himself. He was so relieved that he was freed and restored to Pharaoh that he probably felt what John Bradford felt when he saw falsely accused prisoners led to their execution. There, but for the grace of God, go I. He had his freedom back. He had his high-paying job back, with its public prestige and plentiful perks. He could drink the finest wines of antiquity anytime he wanted. He was the one who put all those fine wines in the wine cellar. Life was good, great, especially given the alternative that he was a hairbreadth away from. He didn't want to think of Joseph. He got out in the nick of time and by the skin of his teeth, too close for comfort. He didn't want to think of anyone suffering. He didn't want to see anyone who was still in chains and still in misery. It is a Sphinx eat Sphinx world out there. And as long as he, the cupbearer, was restored, he deliberately put Joseph and every other unfortunate, unfulfilled, unhealthy, uneducated, unproductive, unhappily, unjustly accused prisoner out of mind and out of memory. It's a natural reaction. We suppress the sufferings of others, either because we're selfish or, in the most charitable of cases, because we are too busy, too absorbed, and too preoccupied with our own troubles. Perhaps we are relieved that we ourselves are not living in a box under the 59th Street Bridge. There, but for the grace of God, go I. And thus, we do not have the time or the space for the troubles of others. Like the cupbearer who benefited from Joseph, we too deliberately suppress the memory that we have benefited from others. We convince ourselves that our success is due solely to ourselves. We are so smart, so hard-working, we are so talented. As accomplished as many of us may be, how much of what we have can really be credited to us? Did any of us awake one morning and say to ourselves, I will invent a computer today? I will invent a new system of government today and call it democracy. I will discover fire today. I will invent the wheel today. I will set sail for a new continent and call it America. I will invent antibiotics today. I will create a capital market today. I will choose my parents, and I chose my parents well and made sure that they would give me a warm home, a good education, and a head start in life. Come on. All of us stand on the shoulders of countless generations who came before us and of countless people who contribute today to who we are and what we have. Practically everything we have was handed to us on a silver platter. The whole history of the world has come into our laps. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "The human race has gone out before us, sunk the hills, filled the hollows, and bridged the rivers. Men, nations, poets, artisans have all worked for us. To think only of ourselves, to credit ourselves alone for our accomplishments, status, wealth, and prestige, really is a form of idolatry. As the book of Deuteronomy insists, When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses to live in, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own has prospered, beware, lest your heart grow haughty and you forget that it was God who freed you from Egypt. You didn't do it alone. Beware of saying, Kochi ve'otzem yadi asali et ha'chayil hazeh. Beware of saying, I did this with my own power and my own might, and the might of my hands have won this wealth for me. Do not forget those who are still in the dungeons. Do not suppress the reality of their suffering. Listen to them. Remember them. They too were made in the divine image. They are of equal worth, of equal value, and of equal dignity. No one who believes this of fellow human beings can torture another, especially for the fun of it, or for the power of it, or even for the utility of it. No one who has experienced the dungeon can ever sanction torture. It is the reason that Senator McCain, no tree-hugging, shrinking violet on security, has utterly condemned these brutal and immoral practices. No one who believes that all are of equal worth and of equal value and of equal dignity can sit idly by while our neighbors are still shackled to the chains of poverty, crime, and violence. No one who believes in America can accept that a man who was not armed and was not dangerous was killed for selling Lucy's on a street corner. Now, I know that many people are anti-police. I am not one of them. To the contrary, I think I speak for much of the Jewish community as well. We are exceedingly appreciative of the police. Our tradition insists that we pray for the welfare of the government, without which people would swallow each other alive. Moreover, the New York police have gone out of their way for us. We are extremely sensitive to security nowadays, and we consider the cops our friends, and in many ways, our security blanket. When we see them outside, and they're often outside, we feel better. And we take a moment to go up to them and to thank them for their concern. It doesn't mean, however, that they are perfect. They themselves should lament that the arrest of an unarmed man led to his death. They themselves should want the best possible training that obviates the need for violence in such cases. There is still racism, prejudice, bias, sexism, and anti-Semitism in our society, in the political establishment, in the clergy, the judges, the educators, the military, and yes, the police as well. To acknowledge this is not to discredit society. It is to pledge to continue the progress that has already been made. I'm struck by the huge gap in how blacks and whites view the justice system. I'm struck by the huge gap between how blacks and whites view the police. We have an obligation to listen to each other. Nothing is black and white. We can't pretend that this gap doesn't exist. And we can't pretend that as long as this gap exists, that we can be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The moral health of our nation is built upon just laws and equal treatment under the law. The Talmud teaches that the first question that we will be asked at the last judgment is, have you dealt justly with your neighbors? Given the inherent biases in people, we must be on guard constantly for injustice and inequality and build societal correcting mechanisms to repair flaws. Just laws are critical because, as Martin Luther King said, it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can prevent him from lynching me, and I think that's pretty important. But we must realize that laws are never enough. As Reverend King said, we must plant a sense of love in the hearts of the people. Love really is the answer. Love not in its contemporary emotional usage. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And Judaism, too, values that kind of love. Although, honestly, nowadays, we express our love for each other a bit too much, for my tastes. It has become trite and overused, and we realize that when someone says they love us, it doesn't usually mean what we hope it means. Sometimes, just respecting or tolerating another is good enough. We don't have to have such deep emotional responses to everyone. And that's why the ancient sage Hillel emphasized love as that which is hateful to you, do not do unto others. This is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. This is the kind of love that we need to instill in the hearts and in the minds of all Americans. Laws can't do that. Only moral training can. The love that insists, if something is hateful to you, do not do it unto others. It is the love that demands, if you have ever experienced real torture, you would never torture others. If you have ever experienced real abuse, you would never abuse others. If you have ever experienced real injustice, you will not tolerate injustice towards others. If you have ever experienced real slavery, you will never enslave another. If you have ever experienced real poverty, you would never impoverish another. Hotzeitani min habayit hazeh. As Joseph said to the cupbearer, get me the heck out of here. Release me from this prison. We do have the power to free people from the dungeons of despair, but only if we remember them and do not deliberately suppress the memory of them.